Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
I was working at expensive coffee shop, and let me tell you, yesterday was one for the books. It kicked off with a customer rolling up to the drive-thru, rattling off an order for a blended beverage that sounded more like a chemistry experiment than a coffee drink. They wanted extra pumps of this, no whip but double drizzle of that, an alternative milk I didn't even know we carried, and a specific blending time down to the second. I'm not exaggerating. It was so far removed from the original menu item that I had to double-check we could even make it. And while all of this was going on, there was a kid in the back seat screaming loud enough to rival an air horn. It wasn't just crying either. This kid was wailing at the top of their lungs, like they were auditioning for the lead-in. The customer, completely unfazed, didn't make even the slightest effort to soothe the child or turn the volume down. Instead, they just kept shouting their over-the-top order over the chaos, as if that somehow made the whole situation normal. When they finally pulled up to the window, I handed over their drink, but of course it was missing one tiny topping, just one. It was something we could easily add on top in a matter of seconds, but no, the customer wasn't having it. They immediately demanded we remake the entire drink from scratch, like it was some huge affront to their day. I tried to explain as calmly as I could that we had a long line of customers all waiting for their orders and that it would only take a minute to add the topping they wanted. But they weren't having any of it. They stood there, arms crossed, like they were ready to wage war over a sprinkle of something I could have doused on in under a minute. It was one of those moments where you realize no matter how reasonable you try to be, some people just want to make everything a bigger deal than it needs to be. Why does it need to be remade? I asked, doing my best to keep my cool, though inside I was starting to lose patience. The customer let out an exaggerated huff, clearly irritated. It doesn't have enough caramel drizzle, they said, like I'd personally wronged them in some way. I was absolutely baffled. The drink they ordered didn't even come with caramel drizzle by default. They had specifically asked for extra caramel, which I'd already piled on top. More than our usual extra serving. I'd even drizzled it around the rim of the cup, going above and beyond what most customers even expect. But apparently none of that mattered. I want extra caramel, they demanded, their voice getting louder with each word, like I was somehow supposed to know what that meant without them explaining it. It felt like every word they said made the situation worse, and I was left standing there wondering how much more caramel they thought could possibly fit on a drink. At this point, I was beyond frustrated. It was supposed to be my day off, but I'd come in to help out, thinking it would be a quick shift. I had already stayed past the time I originally agreed to, and then kept pushing myself even longer after reluctantly accepting a second extension. I'd been stuck in this endless cycle of customer complaints and special requests for hours, and honestly, I was so ready to go home. But still, I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the irritation, and made the decision to give this customer exactly what they wanted. Despite how ridiculous the whole situation felt, I was determined to finish it and hopefully move on with my life, at least for the rest of the day. I grabbed a new cup and started coating the inside with caramel. I'm docking thick layers here, to the point where you couldn't even see the actual drink through the syrup. For good measure, I added a 1/4 inch of caramel to the bottom of the cup. Then I piled on the other requested topping, and following my manager's instructions, gave them half a container of it on the side. As I was finishing up this caramel monstrosity, I couldn't help but think about how utterly ridiculous the whole situation was. Here I was on my day off, working longer than I'd planned, dealing with a customer who was determined to be impossible to please no matter what we did. It felt like no matter how much extra caramel I added, it would never be enough. Like this person was playing some game where the rules kept changing. I couldn't believe I was stuck in this loop, sacrificing my free time for someone who was clearly out of touch with reality. I handed over the drink, praying that would be the end of it. I still had one more task to finish before I could finally clock out and go home. I started wiping down the cafe, already looking forward to putting this entire day behind me. The last thing I wanted was more drama, but of course it couldn't be that simple. Just as I was about to wrap up, who comes storming back into the store? Yep, our caramel-loving friend. And let me tell you, they were. Their face was red and the anger was practically radiating off them as they marched up to the counter like they were ready to start a scene all over again. They marched up to the counter, Their face flushed red with anger and started ranting about how they didn't deserve to have an employee get mad and fill their cup with. I stood there, mouth hanging open, completely dumbfounded. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I'd done, after remaking the drink and practically begging them to calm down, they were accusing me of— It was like I had stepped into some alternate universe where logic didn't exist, and nothing I did could ever be enough for this person. Thankfully, my manager stepped in. "Well, what do you want?" they asked calmly. "You got extra caramel, and it wasn't enough. Then you got extra, and now it's too much. You're going to have to explain exactly what you're looking for here." The customer sputtered, clearly not expecting to be called out like that. They started rambling about how they just wanted a normal amount of extra caramel, whatever that meant. My manager listened patiently, nodding along, then finally said, "I see. So when you say extra, what you actually mean is just a little bit more than our standard extra. Is that correct?" The customer, still fuming, gave a sharp nod, barely able to hold it together. "Well," my manager continued, keeping his tone calm, "in the future it would be really helpful if you could be more specific with your requests. Our staff can't read minds, you know. They're just trying to give you what you ask for." The customer opened their mouth like they were about to argue, but the words seemed to catch in their throat. It was like my manager had finally hit the nail on the head, and for a second there was nothing they could say. I could have hugged my manager right then and there. It was so satisfying to see this difficult customer put in their place, even if it was done politely. The customer mumbled something about poor service and stormed out, leaving us all in a state of disbelief. As soon as the door closed behind them, my coworkers and I exchanged looks of exasperation and relief. "Can you believe that?" one of my colleagues whispered, still in disbelief. "All that fuss over caramel drizzle." I shook my head, still processing what had just happened, feeling the frustration simmering beneath the surface. "I swear, some people just live to make our lives difficult." My manager turned to me with a sympathetic smile, his tone softening. "You handled that really well. I'm sorry you had to deal with that on your day off. Why don't you head home now? We can take care of the rest." It was like a weight lifted off my shoulders just hearing those words. I gave a small, grateful nod, ready to escape the chaos and put this entire ordeal behind me. Grateful for the reprieve, I quickly gathered my things and clocked out. As I walked to my car, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Who gets that worked up over caramel drizzle? I mean, sure, we all have our preferences, but to throw a fit like that, it was beyond ridiculous. The drive home gave me time to reflect on the day's events. Part of me wanted to be angry at the customer for being so unreasonable, but mostly I just felt drained. Dealing with people like that was exhausting, and it made me question why I was in this line of work in the first place. But then I remembered the way my manager had handled the situation, and how my coworkers had rallied around me. Despite the stress and frustration, there was a sense of camaraderie that made it all a little more bearable. As I pulled into my driveway, all I could think about was the chaos I'd just survived. Karen, with her impossible demands and endless caramel, had drained every ounce of patience I had. I made a mental note to grab my manager a thank you coffee the next day for handling it so well. It was moments like that, when someone had your back, that made the grind worth it. The next morning, I woke up dreading what the day might bring. I had hoped the whole situation would just fade into the background, but I knew better. Karen had made it clear she wasn't the type to let things go. I showed up to work a little earlier than usual, still a little groggy, but I pushed it down and dove into the routine. The coffee machines were buzzing, the line was already long, and my manager was behind the counter, ready for anything. We exchanged a quick glance and he gave me a nod as if to say, "I've got your back today." It didn't take long for Karen to make her grand return. The moment she walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. She was scanning the room, and then her eyes locked onto me. Of course, she marched straight up to the counter, like she owned the place. "Excuse me," she barked. "I need to speak to the manager right now." I braced myself, but my manager was already on it. He walked over with that calm, measured look he always had. No sign of nerves, despite Karen's glare. "I'm the manager. How can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady. Karen didn't waste any time. "I was here yesterday, and I got the worst service. My drink was completely wrong, and your staff was incredibly rude. I demand compensation for the trouble I've been through." I couldn't help but roll my eyes, though I made sure she didn't see. This was the same person who'd caused all the fuss over caramel drizzle. Now she was acting like she'd been wronged, as if the world owed her something. My manager, though, stayed professional. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he said, his voice still calm. "We did everything we could to accommodate your order, but it seems there was some confusion with the request. I'll be happy to assist you today if you'd like another drink." "No," Karen snapped. "I don't want a new drink. I want you to take this seriously and do something about the way your staff treated me." "I can't believe you run a business this unprofessional," my manager stayed composed. "I understand your frustration, but we do have policies in place, and I'd be happy to assist you within those guidelines. However, I need to make it clear that yelling at my staff and making unreasonable demands is not acceptable." Karen's face turned bright red. "Are you seriously telling me to calm down? I will not stand for this kind of treatment." She pointed a finger in his face, practically spitting her words. That was it. My manager stepped forward, his voice firm now. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you continue to behave in this manner, I'll have no choice but to bar you from the premises." Karen's eyes went wide with shock, her mouth gaping as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You can't do that. You can't just kick me out over a drink." "I can," my manager replied coolly. "And I just did. Please leave." She stood there, furious for a moment. But the reality of it all finally sank in. Karen was being escorted out by security, her protests echoing in the cafe. The customers who had been quietly watching the scene unfold now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and a few even whispered to each other. The tension in the air faded, and the noise of the shop seemed to return to normal, as if her presence had been a storm that had passed. As my manager turned back to the counter, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. It wasn't every day you saw someone like Karen get shown the door. And I have to admit, it was kind of satisfying to see someone like her finally be held accountable. "Well, that was something," I muttered, wiping down the counter. My manager nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Just another day in paradise," I laughed, feeling the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. I was glad it was over, but part of me was already bracing for the next challenge. At least I could take comfort in knowing that no matter how outrageous the customer, there were people like my manager who could handle it and keep things running smoothly. That day, as I clocked out and left, I realized that for once maybe Karen had learned her lesson. But then again, I doubted it. People like her rarely change.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.